Here we are. I'm going to talk about asset security, which is really short, and we'll do a little bit of this security engineering chapter that's really long. That's the plan for tonight. So here's asset security. So we're going to talk about classifying data, ownership of data, memory and remnants, which is leftover data on devices you're throwing away typically, data destruction, how to get rid of it when you're done with it, and data security controls. So classifying data is extremely important, and this is actually a huge problem in the cloud. This is one of the things that happens with Microsoft Copilot 365. It helps you write things by looking in all your data stored in Microsoft Cloud services, but it doesn't understand the security levels of those services unless you have labeled all the stored documents. And this is what you have to label them with. Now, if you're at a government, it's confidential, secret, and top secret, things like that, sensitive but unclassified and for official use only. In the private sector, it's typically internal or company proprietary, that sort of thing. But you do have to have a sensitivity label on your documents, or automated things like the Microsoft Cloud AI cannot tell what it should do with things. So there's also security compartments. This is sensitive compartmented information. This is information which requires not only a documented vertical level of clearance. If it's top secret, you have to have top secret, but also a need to know. And then these things can only be opened in SCIFs, sensitive compartmented information facilities, which are like, safes. They're buildings where no internet, no windows, rooms, and you have to be in that room to look at the information. You can't take it out of that room and all that, to try to stop anybody from taking pictures of it or have it leak out. So clearance is the formal determination whether you can be trusted with a level of information. This is called vertical security. And so things like debt or drug use and personal secrets and so on are reasons for denying clearance. The most common ones are drug use and foreign influence. And formal access approval is documented approval from the owner, which means you have to understand what the rules are for this particular document and the consequences. And we'll talk a lot more about the owners of data as we go ahead. The owner of data, remember, now some people think of ownership, it just means it's yours and you can do whatever you want with it, but here you need to think of sort of the ancient nobility sense of ownership. Like a noble family that owns a castle that's been passed down through the generation, they don't think that means you can do anything you want with it. They think it means you have to maintain it and keep it in repair and protect its reputation and appearance and everything. That's the sense of data ownership. You're the owner of the data, therefore you're responsible for what happens to that data and making sure it's handled in a good way. So need to know is least privilege typically, and they often rely on users just to police themselves by following policy and only attempting to access information they need to know. It would, of course, be nicer if there were technical controls blocking you to get at documents, but that may not be practical. You may just have to have policy. And one of the most amazing cases of this I remember was when, in about 2012, anonymous hackers hacked into and dumped out a bunch of top secret military stuff. The one I'm thinking of was Chelsea Manning, then Bradley Manning, dumped out a bunch of data stuff that was classified. And the orders went out from military high-ranking figures to tell the soldiers, you must not read this stuff. Even though it's in the New York Times, you can't read those New York Times articles because you haven't been cleared to see that information. And at one level, this is absurd, because obviously there's no longer any worry about keeping it secret since it's leaked out. But it's this, you're supposed to be self-policing, you're supposed to have high morale, you're supposed to have integrity, so you obey the rules, even when there's no barrier blocking you, and therefore it would be like a violation of your ethics and integrity to read the New York Times article and discover information you're not cleared to know. It's an interesting idea. Anyway, so sensitive information is stuff that requires protection, and therefore you have to protect it wherever it's stored, the primary storage and the backups, and your policies will have to talk about how you handle it, how you store it, how you retain it, and how you get rid of it when you're done with it. So like I said, ownership, various people own things. Their mission and business are owned by somebody. Senior management owns these, and they create an information security program, and they make sure it's properly staffed and given enough priority and resources to protect the assets. And that's why if a company gets hacked and the data leaks out, the top executives are responsible for that. Even though other people probably made mistakes and they'd be responsible for not living up to their duties, the top management had the duty of protecting that data, and it is ultimately their responsibility and their fault that it got lost because they are responsible for what the people under them do, and that's why they have power to fire and hire and give them orders and move them around and reassign them, and they're supposed to use those powers in a way that succeeds in protecting the data. So data owners are the information owners, and this means a particular employee responsible for protecting specific data. So somebody will be responsible for the PII data of your own employees that you have in, say, the HR records. And so they'll determine the sensitivity labels, how it's backed up. The data owner does management, and the custodian actually does the work. The data owner is responsible for making sure the custodian does the right thing. So that's important. By the way, there's a technical thing called an owner in, say, a Windows file system, the owner of a file, and that's, of course, a different issue. That's just the level of, that's the person that's able to determine who can view the file, which is sort of analogous, but not exactly the same thing. And a system owner is responsible for the physical computers, so things like hardware, software, updates, patches, cabling, and so on. And again, they typically have a custodian that actually does the work, but there's an owner, which is the manager responsible for making sure that those systems are properly cared for. And a custodian, that I talked about, are the people who actually do the hands-on work, and they are not exactly, they're not responsible for deciding how things should be done. They're responsible for carrying out the orders that come from the owner. All right, and they do things like performing backups, putting on patches, and so on. Users, of course, are people that just use systems, like their employees that just use a computer and they aren't responsible for installing it or putting on the antivirus or maintaining it. They're just using it, and so they have like an end user agreement. So they must understand there's certainly security rules for them, like they can't share accounts or write down passwords, and they should be in the employee handbook or the user agreement. They should be made aware of what they must do and what the punishments will be if they break the agreement. And then there's data controllers that create and manage sensitive data. Human resources employees typically create data for payrolls. And there's data processors that manage data on behalf of data controllers, and that's often outsourced. You often outsource some of your data to be handled, and you're responsible then for making sure they don't do bad things at the outsourced location, and that's third-party risk. And so, in general, it's a good idea to not collect so much data. About 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, every time you'd buy a pair of shoes, there'd be a card in there saying, please register these things you bought and give us your name and address and phone number and everything. You'd mail it in, and you always wondered what those were for. And sometimes they'll give you a coupon or something. Often they give you nothing. And I heard from a lot of people inside companies to usually have a pile of those cards. Nobody's figured out what to do. And recently, people have wised up and said, we really should not collect any data that we don't need, because if we lose it, now we have a breach and there's trouble. So it would be wiser to just not collect data unless you actually need to collect it. That would be a nice, simple way to avoid leaking it. So let me check for comments in the Twitch. And okay, nothing new, good. And let's try the Kahoot. This is 2A, pardon me, in this class. To make sure I'm on 2, I am on 2. All right, there we go. All right, got to adjust this window size. That looks pretty good. Good. I remember when I took the CISSP exam, I had great trouble understanding the difference between a data owner and a data custodian. It seems easy to me now, but I had great trouble learning it the first time. All right, so what kind of the data requires need to know in addition to clearance? sensitive compartmented information. All right? Not just secret, that's just a vertical control. It's compartmented in that there's also a horizontal control. Even people that have secret clearance can't get to it if they don't also have formal access approval. Who puts on patches? All right, the custodian puts it on, and there was an interesting case where a big company got breached, I forget which one, and then they tried to blame the custodian, saying it was our staff member that didn't put on the patch. And the question would be, if the owner had ordered them to, and they just didn't do it, then it would be the custodian's fault. But if the owner didn't tell them to, and it wasn't their normal practice to, then it would be the owner at fault, and the custodian would be at fault, would not be at fault because they were obeying the instructions from the owner, I would think, in general terms. Anyway, it's the custodian that would actually do the work. But they might not be to blame if they were obeying instructions that came from above. Anyway. All right, who's the manager responsible for ensuring that the patches are applied? The system owner is the most direct answer. The mission owner is, of course, indirectly responsible for everything that happens, but the system owner is the one most directly responsible for a thing like that. All right, and where are HR people? I guess they say they're data controllers. I thought maybe data processors. Well, that's kind of unfair, and you might as well get used to it. CISSP questions are often unfair, although a practice test will give you just the right kind of unfairness. Mine have some mistakes that are more sloppy. But anyway, that's what it says in the book. They're controllers. Anyway, that is what they call them, by the way. Financial people, they call them controllers. B-Man, will have to tell me who they are for what their points. NL, maybe a real name, however. So, fine, let's go on to the next bit here. Okay, so memory and remnants. Data remnants is data left over in a storage media after you try to erase it and your erase is incomplete. This happens all the time. People that buy computers or hard drives, they buy on used places, often they're full of data. So memory is typically ephemeral, which means it only remembers while the power is on, and if you turn the power off, it quickly forgets, like RAM. There's also cache memory on the CPU chip and registers as part of the CPU, and all these are technically memory, but all these things forget as soon as you turn off the power. And so there usually isn't an issue of retained data in there unless you lose something like a laptop in suspend mode where the power is still on, and then the memory is in fact still in RAM and it can be retrieved by various tricks such as freezing the memory and moving it to another machine. So RAM is volatile, like I'm describing. ROM is not volatile. That's the whole point. It remembers when the power is turned off, but typically there's nothing remotely sensitive in ROM. All you have in ROM is the boot up ROM, typically, which is nothing more than a program to help the computer search out to find out what kind of hard drive and keyboard and such it has and start up. There's nothing sensitive in there, typically. I mentioned this. The cold boot attack is a way to steal data from RAM. If you can get it while the power is still on, you can freeze it, and then you can make it last perhaps 30 minutes or so, which is enough time to put it and connect to another machine and read what was on the RAM. And that's how the cold boot attack, which can break through encryption like Microsoft's whole drive encryption, which I can't remember the name of right now. It'll come to me. Maybe one of you remember in the Twitch chat. It's not a bad idea to check now and then what's going on in Twitch. Yeah, controller and processor. That's right. Those confuse me. But I think the processor is like like a data processor just doing data entry or something. BitLocker, that's the name I was looking for. Thank you. I was hoping you guys would remember it. Yeah. Anyway, all right. Oh, good. And I know who B-Man is. Let me make a note of that before I forget. Good. All right, good. Anyway, So that's the cold boot attack. Then there's dynamic memory and static memory. They're just different versions of RAM. I don't think it matters for a security point of view which one you have. One is just faster, but they both forget when you turn the power off. Firmware is programs stored in ROM chips to start up your machine, like I was describing, and they are retained when the power goes off, but there's typically nothing remotely sensitive in there, not a username, not a password, nothing, just a generic program to start the computer. And there's a lot of ROM chips that do remember, programmable read-only memory that you can write once, programmable logic devices that are field programmable in various ways. You can write them and erase them and write them again. And then, of course, the thumb drives, flash memory. As you know, you can store data, you can delete it and put on fresh data, and it remembers. I remember there was a study about 10 years ago where they interviewed executives, and they found out the average executive owned 20 flash drives and had lost 15 of them. So this is a really big form of data leakage. Your more secure shops might force you to have encrypted thumb drives, which do exist, but they cost more. So I got USB thumb drives, like I say, they're, you know how they work. They're faster than EEPROMs. They're slower than magnetic disks, but still they're a pretty good place to store data. All right, and solid state drives, as you know, are like thumb drives, but they're faster. And as I mentioned before, bad blocks are replaced silently by the SSD controller, and the old bad blocks technically contain some data. So it's very hard to erase all the data and ever make it safe to reuse, to give this away. Empty blocks are erased, however, automatically in a garbage collection process, but I don't think the bad blocks are ever erased. So if you're very strict, even a thoroughly erased drive that you think you can donate to a school or something probably has a little bit of data on it that could be retrieved by an advanced forensic tool, but it's probably a very minor amount. Anyway, like I say, it's effectively, overriding from the computer is ineffective. It's not perfectly effective. You can't ever access all the blocks. It may have an internal erase command, but you can't verify that it worked, and my friends in the industry tell me it frequently fails. That's why most companies will not ever donate storage devices of any kind to anybody else. They will just grind them up and physically destroy them, which is safer. Then you know the data is gone, and besides, the price keeps falling, so the value of an old storage device is pretty small. So there are two physical areas to destroy it. One is physically destroyed. The other is what the iPhone does. Turn on encryption before it's ever used, so all the data that's ever stored on there is encrypted, even the bad blocks, and then you delete the key. Then the data is still technically there, but it's unobtainable because the key is lost. This has proven extremely effective. The iPhone works very well. That's why you can reset your iPhone to factory default. The process is instantaneous. It doesn't take time because all it does is delete the key. It doesn't have to erase any large amount of data, and it's very effective. So that's one way to securely erase an SSD. So you can clean and sell your iPhone safely. You just go through the manual reset to factory defaults. That data is really gone. All right, let me check the, okay, good. Nothing new in the comments there. All right, and so deleting a file does not erase its contents. You have to write on top of the sectors it used. This can be called shredding or wiping, and you can do this with command line commands on a Windows machine. You can get tools like Eraser or steganography or programs you can put on a Windows machine. And then that's how you really erase things. You write over all the blocks. Of course, as I mentioned, the bad blocks are not getting erased, but very few people know that. Even a lot of documents neglect that. And it's considered a very small amount of loss there, small amount of leakage there. You can also try to degauss it with a strong magnetic field, and in principle that could be fine. The problem is it's very difficult to think of a way to verify that your degaussing was strong enough and really erased all the data. Right, physically destroying is much simpler. Just completely destroy, just grind it up so it's physically gone. That's the way to really be sure that the data is gone. Let's try another Kahoot, which is 2B. See the Elon Musk, looks like a zip code. I don't think that's his zip code, but I don't know. I think he still lives in California. Maybe he lives in Texas now. Actually, I think I read that Elon Musk does not have any home. He just sort of moves from place to place, sort of like a nomad. Don't think he actually owns a house or anything. All right, which component retains data longer when it's cold? The RAM is when this is actually done. Now, I suppose technically the cache and registers last longer when they're cooled if you think about it from a material science point of view, but in practical terms, the only actual case where you do this is in the RAM, and that's very much a CISSP kind of question. That is the kind of confusing they are. You have to think like a manager and think about what is the most reasonable answer to this question that would actually matter in practice, even though in some esoteric theoretical sense, some other answers have some truth in it. This is the most logical answer. That's the kind of thinking you have to do for the CISSP exam. All right, which one can only be written once? Uh-oh. Okay, that's easier than I thought it would be. Hello. Yeah, 125, yeah. All right.
So this is it?
This is it, yeah.
Okay. I was walking around. I'm so sorry I'm late. You're a teacher, right?
Yeah, what's that? Yeah. Yep, just most people are connecting remotely, but you're welcome. Good.
Oh, I'm supposed to be remote?
Yeah, have you been to the previous classes?
No, I thought this was in person.
It is in person technically, but you can't connect remotely, and that's what most people are doing.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, anyway.
I was coming to tell you that I work, my schedule's like crunch. I work at 5 and I come from Vacaville. So
Yeah.
it's like almost a 2-hour commute for me.
Oh, well, just let me finish this, and then I'll talk about it. Because I'm recording this, and let's finish this, and then I'll tell you. All right, so just which device does garbage collection? All right, and those are SSDs that have garbage collection. And here's the last one. All right, you're discarding an unencrypted SSD. So how should you clean it? Physical destruction is by far the safest way. All right, we're going to record the winners here. Root. I think I know who that is. Okay. All right, fair enough. All right, so I'm going to stop this recording.